So I'm gonna record this big session. We're gonna spend a little bit of time in breakout rooms toward the end as well, and we won't be recording those. But I just started recording, so you'll so be aware of that. I want to say thank you again for being here and welcome to this fourth and final session of the St. Anselm's 2021 Lenten series. I'm Marian Mulkey. I'm co-chair of our Christian Formation Commission. And as I've said before, each year in this season leading up to Easter, St. Anselm's has this tradition of developing some sort of study and reflection through a series on a topic that challenges us to learn and to grow in some way in our faith and in our actions. This year's topic, restorative justice, really came out of earlier work that some of us did in the Sacred Ground series, where we learned about and grappled with our country's history of racism and revisited some of our underlying assumptions about who we are and who are our neighbors. And in that series, we encountered the beginnings of a conversation about restorative justice that really piqued our interest in learning a little bit more. So that's what led us to this path. It's been a really interesting and fascinating series for those of us who have participated in, and we're really grateful for those who have come to some or all of the sessions today. So in previous sessions, we learned that there's this negative feedback loop that occurs when somebody who's been hurt or harmed goes on to harm others. And conversely, we also learned about a positive feedback loop that can happen when a person who's caused some harm or injury, even great harm, can move from that place of hurt and shame into a place of healing, and in fact be an instrument of healing for others once they go through a process of truth-telling and accepting responsibility and doing that interior and external work to move into a space of healing. So tonight we're really fortunate to have a panel of three people who have rolled up their sleeves, so to speak, to do deep work with people who are in or connected with or in criminal justice settings. So our speakers are going to tell us about the work that they do, how they came to this work, and the impact that they've seen on the lives of those who are involved in that work, both those who are serving and those who are served. And I think you'll hear about how sometimes there isn't maybe as bright a line as you might think between those two groups. So we're going to have that panel conversation. Each of our speakers is going to talk for a bit. And then after the initial part of the session, we will do a little bit of time in small group conversations, really to reflect on what we've heard and what we might do with that information in terms of our own lives or in community. So tonight, let me introduce our great speakers. Richard Olive is a layperson at St. Paul's San Rafael, who's deeply engaged, along with a number of members of that parish, in death row ministry at San Quentin. Reverend Liz Milner is an Episcopal priest, and in her work, I gather, in the transitional diaconate, works as a facility. She learned about the ministry to the incarcerated across the Diocese of California, and currently works as a facility chaplain in the Santa Clara County Jail. And then our third speaker is Mark Drevno, who leads a local nonprofit called Jails to Jobs that supports ex-offenders with workplace reentry. So quite an array of ministries and activities and engagement, but with this justice-involved population, and I think you're going to really appreciate their stories. So I am mildly distracted. Father John, did you want to say something?
No.
Okay, sorry, I
Yeah.
thought I saw your hand raised and
No,
I
I was
was,
clapping.
oh, okay, sorry. I
Yay.
don't know my icons sufficiently well, or I can't see with all the things that are currently on my screen. So, okay, so just a little bit of housekeeping before we go straight to the panel. So as I said, we're going to be recording this full session when we're in the full group. It will be recorded and available after the fact. I think our panel is going to take about 40 or 45 minutes, and then we're going to move into breakout rooms for perhaps 20 or 25. And then, and I'll share more about what to expect and what we were hoping you might take up in your smaller groups at that time. If you've got any questions during the panel, if you could type those into chat, we'll try to integrate those one way or the other, but we're going to mostly let our speakers speak uninterrupted in service of time. And I'm going to mute all so that there isn't a lot of background noise. And I think that's my set of updates and instructions. Are there any questions before we begin our speakers' remarks? All right, I'm going to ask Richard then to lead us off with telling us a bit about his work. And again, I want to welcome those who have just made their way into the room and look forward to hearing our really terrific and interesting speakers. So Richard, please.
Yes, thank you,
Go
Mary.
right ahead.
Thank you for the invitation. I welcome the opportunity to talk a bit about the work that we do, because we certainly have a standing open invitation to anyone who, in the course of this event, is prompted to join us in writing to inmates on death row at San Quentin. And I can readily appreciate, as I have seen the reactions of some other folks, which would in very large part be, "Are you kidding me?" And so I hope to, I hope to impress you with the impact that this service has had on me and others who are involved, and everybody who is involved in this service is a volunteer. And it's a pretty loosely organized effort. We meet as a group. There are about 15 volunteers who are in written communications, sometimes telephonic, with about 20 inmates on death row. I think if I tell you how I got involved, you might identify with the invitation that's open to each of you to consider this as part of your Christian action. There was a particular day about 8 or 9 years ago that Christopher Martin, who is the rector at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in San Rafael, mentioned that several folks, and at that point there were 3, who had been visiting one inmate for about 20 years. And the way that process started was Bishop Swing was in Southern California at one point, and a woman who wound up sitting next to him let him know that she had a son on death row, and would he be willing to visit her son. And he promised to pass the information along to the then rector of St. Paul's, whose name was Bruce Bramlett. And Bruce took on the calling, if you will, and began to visit Joe Cook. Eventually, over the next 5 or 6 years, there were 2 women in the church who, for whatever reason, felt called to engage in the visitation process. And one of them has been visiting Joseph for about 22, 23 years, and the other one for about 15 years. In any case, Christopher said one day at the end of a service that there is this going on, and if anyone was interested in engaging in that way, to see him after the service. Now I'm sitting there, and I certainly had never been chafing at the opportunity to visit anybody on death row at San Quentin. But as I sat there and considered the invitation or the offer, whatever you want to call it, the one thing that came to my mind was in Matthew 25, in the judgment of the nations, where we are challenged to, among other things, clothe the naked, feed the hungry, visit the sick or those in prison. And to me, that was a standing invitation that I hadn't given a lot of thought to. And what hit me was, well, you know, that's something I could probably do. So I talked with him, and I decided to look into it. I was put in touch with another inmate who used to do weights in the prison yard with Joseph Cook. And he and Joseph had been talking with Tim about this visitation program, and he said it sounded like it's something he would be interested in. So I began to write to Tim, and eventually started to visit him, you know, periodically. Now, from that, the word started getting around on death row that there are these nice people out there who visit us and who write to us, and it grew to the point where, as I said, there are now about 15 people who are visiting or writing to 20 inmates on death row. And that's something that has developed and grown over the past 5 or 6 years. Now, it occurred to me that when I first undertook this calling, my thought was, this is something that I could do for the inmates, because you know, it seems to be something encouraged by Christ. So let's see about this. And I, of course, went as a do-gooder, thinking that I'm doing this really worthy gesture. And long story short, about my own experience, is that I have been ministered to by the inmates on death row. They have opened my eyes to what is meant by service, and a much greater appreciation for St. Francis's reminder that it is in giving that we receive. I have been spiritually enriched by these men, and over the years I have corresponded with about 15 of them. I have had to pace myself and wean myself from some of those relationships because it can be all consuming. Um, what we encourage those who volunteer is that don't overextend yourself. But if you do begin to correspond, make sure that you correspond, you write a letter at least once a month to develop a relationship. And I thought it would be helpful because I've collected excerpts over the years of some of the letters that some of these guys have written. And I think from their perspective, what does this mean? And here are some excerpts from a few letters. I thank the Lord Jesus for calling people like yourself to visit with prisoners on the row because I have some men that don't get visits. And I might say that there had been people on death row for 20 or more years who had never gotten a visit from anyone outside of maybe a defense attorney. Another one, I understand it can be very difficult to visit an inmate on death row who is unknown to you all. I would be equally happy just to have someone willing to write to me and get to know me. Someone had told me in the course of my visits that that what impressed him more than anything was that they had been pretty much convinced by their experience that they were thrown, as he put it, on the trash heap by society and felt that that's where they belonged and they were forgotten. And this, of course, was the antithesis of that experience that had been hammered into them. Let's see here. We sent an article. We got a very nice article featured in the Independent Journal in Marin County. And this fellow said, the article you sent was very uplifting. I had no idea how much people care. I was sure I would not meet anyone once I got to San Quentin. Thank you for this connection. I truly need it. I also received a letter from Reverend Martin, 2 letters in a month. I'm doing pretty good. I'm amazed at your willingness to reach out to me, a stranger on death row, and I'm extremely, extremely grateful. I love that your motive for starting to reach out to some of the men here is simply, Jesus said to. There are so many broken, hurting souls here, and it does make a huge difference. I've included a few visiting forms and look forward to an eventual visit. Also, I would love some pen pals. And some of the letters that we share in our bi-monthly meetings from inmates who don't mind us sharing them demonstrates that the depth of the faith of some of these men who have lived basically with the Bible and their own individual Bible study, and some of them do meet together to share their faith in the Word, just blows me away because their focus on faith and the hope that they have in the Lord is so inspiring. So I'm going to make available my email address and a text for anybody who is interested in this. Doesn't mean I'm asking you to commit to write, but we can talk about it and answer any of your questions, as I suspect we'll have a chance to do here today. Um, and I wanted to say also two things quickly. When I began this, my wife was very, very skeptical. She did not like this idea at all. And she reminded me of this as we were driving up from the city about an hour ago. And uh, she has become an incredible advocate with particular reference to a couple of the inmates. One who had never received any packages, and she insisted on contributing to sending him a package a couple of times a year without letting anybody know in death row who it was, because she just wanted to be his angel. And he refers to her as his angel, and he doesn't know who it is. So that was her own epiphany or conversion experience about the worth of a human being who just happens to be on death row. Um, and and I ran across something recently uh, in one of the and from Deuteronomy, as a matter of fact. And for people who are wondering what they can do in anything, what am I being called to do? I was really struck by this. This command, which I enjoin on you today, is not too mysterious and remote for you. It is not up in the sky, nor is it across the sea. No, it is something very near to you, already in your mouth and in your hearts. You have only to carry it out. So there's this great mystery of what are we called to do? Um, to me, it's just a matter of keep your ears open and you'll know. So thanks very much. And I look forward to any questions that anybody may have.
Thank you so much, Richard. That was really lovely, and the depth and length of your dedication really comes through very clearly. So I think we will have some follow-up questions, but I'm going to go ahead and turn to our next speaker, and then we'll circle back with a couple questions after that. So thank you again, Richard, and Reverend Liz Milner, if you would take it from here.
Thank you. It's good to be with you all today. My accent, let's just get that out of the way. I grew up in Scotland and came to the US in '96. So that's the faint accent you're hearing. As was mentioned earlier, my day job is to direct a nonprofit called Correctional Institutions Chaplaincy. It's a bit of a mouthful. Basically what we do is contract with the County of Santa Clara to provide all the chaplaincy services for people in their jails, all except Catholics. Actually, the Catholics have their own priest, and we cover everybody else. So Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, pagan, Hindu, and people who really don't know what they are, which is actually probably most of us at the end of the day. It's interesting listening to Richard talk about death row, where people are basically there for the rest of their lives. Jail is the complete opposite, right? There's a big difference between jails and prisons. Each county has its own jail. There's one in your county. I suggest you look it up and find out where it is. And if you were arrested tonight, hopefully that will not be true of any of you, you would be taken to your county jail. And from there you would wait to see a judge. And a lot of how long you would wait or whether you would get bail or not would depend on if you had a good attorney and lots of money. So what that means is our jails are full of people who have no idea what's happening to them, who have not yet been committed of a crime, and are predominantly from groups in society that don't have resources. So right off the bat, there's a lot of injustice. There's a lot of coming and going in jail. People can be in there for hours, or they can be in there for decades. And sadly, most of the people I know in jail have been in there multiple times. They get out, they come back. They get out, they come back. They go to prison, they get out, they come back. And so it can be a very depressing place. But I have to say, it's the place where I have received most from God that has fueled my faith in God. And I'll say a little bit about why that is. Before I was a jail chaplain, I worked at a church in Palo Alto. Before I came to America, I was a high school math teacher. So I don't have much history in that way with the criminal justice system. And when I came to the US, I remember feeling really afraid of the criminal justice system in the US. For one thing, the police officers all carried guns, which I thought was horrifying. And secondly, I realized I was living in a country that executed its citizens, and that horrified me. And so I had this fear and this horror of what's going on inside these jails and prisons. I have never been arrested. I've never really got into much trouble, which says a lot about my own pathology, probably. But I felt this urge to find out if God was somehow at work behind these fences that I saw when I would drive to the Great Mall in Milpitas to go shopping. You pass the county jail. I'm like, what's going on in there? What kind of people are in there? Because it feels so alien to my life. So one day I Googled Santa Clara County Jail and chaplain, and I stumbled across the chaplain at the time then and called her up and said, I'm a local pastor, can I come and visit? And she said, yes, I can take you in. And so I turned up one Sunday. Not knowing what to expect. And we went in, the doors clanged shut behind me, and she took me to a high-level security unit and led me up to a cell door and said, okay, go say hi. And I felt completely out of my depth, but I went to the door of this cell, and this is some of how chaplain visits go in the jail, because you can't pull people out of the cell. You have to go to the cell door to speak to them. And this young face, a young woman, Latina woman, appears at the door. And I felt like I don't know what to say. I had nothing. I was overwhelmed by the experience. And she looks up at me and she smiles and she says, hello, chaplain, how are you doing tonight? And I was like, instead of exactly what Richard said, instead of me coming to offer something to her, she had welcomed me into her home basically and was asking me how I was. And at that moment, it felt like the barriers that I had felt between me and this group of people who are incarcerated just melted away. This was a young woman smiling at me, asking me how I was. She's a person. She's not an inmate. She's a young woman with a story who wants to connect. And so we got talking. And she told me about her faith in God. She wanted to pray together. She wanted to know what my favorite part of the Bible was. She shared hers. She had a deep faith. She turned out to be 19 years old, never been in trouble before, had got drunk one night and got in a car and killed someone, and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. And yet, the memory I have of her is smiling at me, expressing her faith. And to me, that set the tone for what has now become, my profession in some way, that there is always a person with a story behind the story you read in the newspaper or the story you hear from the attorney or the judge. And the gift she gave me that day was to see the humanity in our system, and ultimately to help me remember the humanity in myself. and the people in my life that I am tempted to give up on. One thing this job has taught me is that the image of God, our humanity, our essence, is always there, even though it's been layered by years and decades of poverty and abuse and crime and violence. That spark of God, that human soul, is always in there. And we never give up on anybody. And that, to be honest, as a parent of 3 children, one of whom is really struggling with bad choices, that has been a source of great comfort to me. Deeply strengthening my faith. Another person I met in jail, his name is Freddie. We get requests from the inmates to supply them with spiritual literature. And our staff team is our county contract employees. And so we are bound to provide materials for whoever is in front of us. We can't just serve the Episcopalians, right? We serve everybody. So Freddie sent me a request form and he asked for a satanic Bible. Now, I come from a good Christian home and we did not read the satanic Bible, but here is Freddie asking for one. I did not have a satanic Bible with me that day, but I did have some literature. So I get my literature, I go to his unit, he gets pulled out of the unit and we sit down in a small conference room. It's maybe 5 feet by 5 feet. He's huge. He's covered in tattoos, many of which show that he has some interest in Satanism. And he looks at me and he says to me, "Chaplain Liz, you must really hate me." And I'm like, "Freddie, I don't hate you. I don't even know you yet." He's like, "Well, you're a Christian lady, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am." He said, "Well, I apologize for asking for a Satanist Bible, but I'm a Satanist." I'm like, "Okay." And in that moment, I believe it might have been God giving me a hand, because it was a little intimidating. But I said to him, "Freddie, do you want to tell me any of the story of how you got to be where you are today?" Now that story took about 45 minutes to share, but I'll condense it. Freddie had been brought up in a Latino household, a fundamentalist Christian. He said he used to go knocking door to door to evangelize. He knew the Bible back to front, the Christian Bible, not the Satanic Bible. He could quote everything to me. He said my life was on a trajectory. I was pastor's kid. I was converting people. I got this girlfriend and I loved her. And then one day she left me for another guy. And I got so mad and sad. And I prayed to God to bring her back. And God didn't. And somehow in my Christian worldview, I could not put that together. And I got mad at God and I got depressed and I got into drugs, and still my girl didn't come back. And I got madder and madder at God. And I got so angry at God, and I thought, what is the one thing I can do to get God back for letting me down? Well, I can get God back by worshiping God's enemy. And that's when I decided to become a Satanist. And I said to him, "Well, you sound angry at God." And he colorfully expressed, "Yes, I am angry at God." And then he said to me, "Do you think, given what I've done," and in the course of his life, he committed some serious crimes, "do you think it's too late for me to come back to God?" And I looked at him, I said, "Freddie, you know the Bible better than I do. You know the prodigal son story." And he's like, I do. And what that started was a conversation. There is no happy ending yet. Freddie got out, came back, is currently incarcerated again in our jail, but is on a journey of re-engaging with God. And his story reminds me that much as I or our society or the courts or different advocacy groups try to classify people as perpetrator or victim in life, what is more realistic is that most of the people I meet in jail, and probably most of us too, are actually a bit of both. And that Freddie had done some awful things, but experienced some awful abuse on the way. And anger at God and rebellion towards God is not the worst thing in the world. So I tell you those stories, those are 2 out of hundreds, because they help me remember 3 things that I've drawn out of jail ministry. One is there is always a person with a story behind the story. Secondly, that we are asked by God never to give up on anyone, whatever they've done or not done. We never give up. I mean, God didn't with us, so we never give up. And thirdly, I've learned not to resist the temptation to classify people too simply. And that's where I'm at today. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was lovely and a great synopsis, not just of your work, but of a lot of what we've heard across this series. So thank you for that. I want to turn now to Mark Drevno, who came at this work from a pretty different direction, I think, than either of our 2 speakers, but equally enriching and, if I can say so, I think enriched by his work. So Mark, please join us and unmute.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Can.
Yeah, it's nice to be here with everybody tonight. Yeah, about 20 years ago, my name's Mark Drevno, and I'm a founder, executive director of a local nonprofit called Jails to Jobs. And I'm a volunteer, and everybody at Jails to Jobs is a volunteer. And I've been doing it for about 11 or 12 years. And I got started a number of years ago. I used to run a company and I'd hire salespeople, and good salespeople are hard to find. Um, I always sort of wondered about where could I find my next good salesperson. And this went back years ago. Remember when we used to put ads in the newspaper? And I put an ad in the newspaper, and this man replied to the newspaper ad, and he called and he said, I've been incarcerated and I'm a recovered drug addict, and I'd like to apply for the job, but I just want to make sure you won't hold it against me. And I really was touched with what he said. So we invited him in for an interview. And this is back when there was a number of us that used to do the interview process. And if any one of us saw a reason not to hire somebody, we would not hire them. So none of us saw a reason not to hire this man. In fact, the day he showed up for his interview, I mean, he had a backpack, and I mean, he was visibly homeless. And so we hired this man, and he actually turned out to be pretty good. He turned out to be a pretty good salesman. He was struggling. His son was taken away from him. He was couch surfing or staying in a motel, and so he didn't really have much. And I never forget one of my first meetings with him. He would ride his bike to work, and he actually ran into a wall because he didn't have any glasses on because he couldn't afford to buy glasses. And he would kind of borrow money from me once in a while to like pay for a hotel room. And for 7 or 8 years, he used to, what he would call it, be out and about on the streets around Children's Hospital in Oakland, using drugs and just sort of hanging out and dealing drugs. And so he decided he wanted to change, and he'd gone through rehab. And so, as I mentioned, he turned out to be a pretty good salesman. And I always kind of remembered that experience. And one day when I was feeling particularly desperate, when I wanted to hire some people, I thought, I've got to find some more people like him, like a diamond in the rough. So I put together this job search workshop. And the reason was for pretty self-serving. I mean, whoever I would hire would obviously benefit from getting a job, but my real motivation was to find salespeople and to go look at places where other people usually wouldn't look. So I'd find a diamond in the rough. So I started going to drug rehabilitation centers, and I started going to like homeless shelters, like the kind where there's the moms and the kids live. And I'd give my little workshop sitting around the kitchen table, and I'd go back every month. And it was nice to see everybody, but they were usually still there. And so I'd be looking usually at the same people. So I need to get in a bigger venue. So that's when I started to go to the county jail. But one thing that I started to learn very early on at the homeless shelter and the drug rehabilitation centers is when I say to people, because I didn't want to accidentally insult anybody, I say, if anybody's ever been incarcerated, I've got some particularly good material for anybody. Like half, 2/3 of the hands would go up. So then I started really seeing about homelessness and incarceration. And so then I started to go to the West County Detention Facility out in San Pablo, Richmond. I talked to there's actually a adult school inside that place. So I talked to the principal of the adult school. I would go in once a month and do this job search workshop. And they have all these different types of things that they work on, like anger management and job search and parenting and all different things. And so they would always put me in when they were doing the job search. And I would go every month, and I would take material to hand out. And again, my main motivation in doing this was to try to find diamonds in the rough of salespeople. So what I would do is I was typically like in a classroom, and I would just say to everybody when I get there, anybody that's getting out in the next 30 to 60 days, why don't you raise your hand, and I'll tell me a little bit about yourself. And then that way I'll kind of make a mental note, make sure that I include something in the presentation about maybe the work that you want to get into or whatever. And my reason for doing that is I wanted to hear them speak, and I wanted to have just a sound bite to get a sense of their motivation and kind of like their personality and whatnot, to see if I could sense any kind of, you know, competitive drive, any sort of, characteristics that are typically involved in being a good salesperson. And so I would do that, and then my motivation is to try to reach them after the class and give them my card and have them call me when they got out. So I did it that way for maybe a few months. And um, and then something just sort of happened, and there was a real shift that went on. And I think what it was is I was going there to try to reach people, and all of a sudden I was sensing that I was being reached by them. And I realized that I really wasn't any different than they were. We just had different stories. And I realized how I won the lottery, like just, and I think back now and it like gives me chills. I mean, just the parents I had and the zip code I was born in and the community connections I had, and, just being a white man. I mean, I just had all of these unearned assets that were just treated me so well in my life. And at one time in my life, I used to think a lot more about how I have what I have because, oh, I'm smart or I work hard or I've got these different things that I've done. And as I got older, I realized that it's really more about these unearned assets and winning the lottery with my parents and my zip code and some of these other things. So, what this has evolved into is, my life's work is sharing these unearned assets with other people, because it's very much of a, there's a systematic situation out there when it comes to people and structures and neighborhoods and corralling people, and it's incredibly unfair. And so that's what's touched me deeply about this work. And one of the experiences I had early on when I would do the job search workshop, as I was before the class started, there was this man, sitting in the front row. he had tattoos everywhere. And I was chatting with him, and he told me, yeah, he looked like he's probably like in his 30s. He says, yeah, I have a carpet cleaning business. He says, my mom does my door-to-door selling because I'm too scary looking. And he was pretty scary looking. And I just listened to him, and I didn't have anything to offer him, and I could really feel, what it's like when we just sort of drop everything and we sense into the field and we can actually feel somebody's heart. I mean, I could feel this guy's heart, that he had regret, and he wondered, like, what do I do now? And so it always struck me, I really remembered that. And so then I stumbled upon one day about, how they take tattoos off with lasers and how effective it can be. And so to honor this man, I wish I would have remembered his name, and I don't. Um, well, one of the things that we have on our website, jailstojobs.org, is there's a directory of over 300 free or low-cost community-based tattoo removal programs in 42 states. So now, if somebody wants to get their tattoos removed, I feel like I've got something to offer them. You know, and so it was a very heartfelt, touching situation with that man. And so it's not as good as it makes me feel to know that we've got this directory at our website. There's still 8 states that there are no um, programs that we can find anyway. And then there's conditions at some programs. As lovely as it is, if you take Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, um, I don't think that should be a condition of getting your tattoos removed. And there's some programs that is a condition. So what we decided to do is we wrote a book on how to start a free or low cost community based tattoo removal program, and we actually give that to nonprofits who are interested in starting a program. And then what we also did about 4 years ago is we connected with some local doctors, and now we have a way of offering tattoo removal to people in the 9 Bay Area counties through our network of doctors and other nonprofits that we can refer our clients to. And we're expanding even more in this area, where we're actually going to be working with a large nonprofit to establish a tattoo removal clinic on site in their facility, and bring in the equipment and recruit the volunteer doctors and other healthcare providers to actually do the tattoo removal, because tattoo removal is huge. As you might imagine, if you have an antisocial or gang related tattoo that's visible, it's really hard to get a job, you know. And some of these folks, when they get their tattoos, they're not thinking very clearly. They might be under the influence of drugs. They might be, other reasons. There's people that are trafficked, and they have their pimp puts their name on them, and all kinds of horrible things like that. Or somebody's forced to even have a boyfriend's name put on them or something. But so to get these tattoos removed, it's very expensive. For about the size of a business card, it costs about $300. If you go to a dermatologist, it's about $300 every time you go. And you might have to go 8, 10, 12 times. So it gets to be very expensive. So that's why this network of doctors and nonprofits that take them off for free, it's so huge. But we've got the how-to guide, and also all of our handouts for job search turned into a book. And that's turned into a very nice program where we actually, any jail in the United States or any prison in the United States, any lending library there that wants a copy of our book, we send it to them and they put it in their lending library. So we do that. And then we get people that are incarcerated write us from time to time, and we send them a copy of our book. So the job search is really a wonderful way to help people tell their story when they get out, because there's a lot of shame and guilt for the people that have been incarcerated about what they've done. And they're so uncomfortable talking about it. So you might imagine what you might do if you were in that situation is you just wouldn't say, or you would not, would maybe lie on the application, or just hope it would go away. And it usually doesn't, because it's so cheap nowadays to run a background check. I mean, you can run one for, $35 or something. So most employers run background checks. So one of the biggest things that we do is we coach people how to tell their story, and how to tell it in a way that is truthful, but also hopefully, again, reaching into that field and reaching into the heart of the hiring manager, that they can feel the job applicant's heart and get a sense of how this person has changed, if in fact they have. So, because it's a heck of a thing to have to be labeled with the worst thing that you've ever done in your life. I mean, could you imagine if we were labeled with the worst thing that we've ever done? And chances are the worst thing we've ever done, maybe nobody even knows about it. But if you've been incarcerated, I mean, it's right there for everybody to see in public view. So it's quite something. So healing is critical, and tattoo removal is a big part of healing. So that's why we've gotten so big in it. And there's a test, a little instrument that can be administered to people to kind of get a sense of their background and where they've been. And some of you folks maybe even heard of it. It's been around for quite a while. It's called the ACE test, Adverse Childhood Experiences. Most people that we come in contact with are going to be a 9 or a 10 on that little test. I mean, I'm a 0. Okay. They're a 9 or a 10. Okay. I mean, the trauma that these folks have experienced in their life, physical abuse, mental abuse, sexually abused. It seems like most of the women that have been involved, that are girlfriends, kind of, usually women aren't in gangs, but they may be somebody's girlfriend who's in a gang. But a lot of the women that are involved in that sort of life, they've been sexually abused. It's just not uncommon. It's not uncommon for a lot of the men to have been sexually abused. They just don't talk about it. So it's an incredible, when you really get in and you start looking and seeing and you look at these folks and how abused they've been, and how so many of them have grown up in households where their parents were doing drugs, or maybe the mom was on drugs and she did, was the prostitution to try to bring money into the family, or they had to move multiple times or whatever. I mean, could you imagine growing up like that, what you might turn out like? Or maybe when you're a pre-teenager or teenager and nobody's really around and you're having to take care of one of your younger brothers or sisters, or there's not much food in the kitchen or whatever. I mean, it's these awful stories are very, very common when you get involved with people that have been incarcerated. So um, it's really an invitation that I see it as, being not in judgment of how they carry what they have to carry, but just in awe of what they have to carry. It's an incredible, incredible thing. So if if someone has been incarcerated can get some education, it's less likely they're going to reoffend. If they can get a job, it's less likely we could reoffend. So that's one of the things that we're helping with. But if they can truly heal, they're not going to reoffend. And that's why I think it's so important for us, for people that have particularly that have all the unearned assets, to show up where they are and to bear witness to them and to see what it's like from their view of their hovel, so to speak, and to get into relationship with them, to not as a service provider and a service recipient, because that's distant, but to really try to get to know them in a way that is of service. And so that's really what we try to do at Jails to Jobs, and how incredibly enriching it's been for me in my life. I have never been happier in any kind of a profession ever, doing what I'm doing and not even being paid for it. I mean, it's really something when you think that you can go to work and do things and never get paid for it, but be so satisfied. So we're always looking for volunteers. If you want to go to jailsandjobs.org, our website, we particularly need like anybody who's a doctor or knows a doctor. We offer training for the laser tattoo removal. And if anybody's a nurse practitioner, a physician assistant, or a nurse, I mean, we can always use some of those helping hands too. But jailstojobs.org is our website. There's a contact form there, or you can email me, mark@jailstojobs.org. And I'm also happy to get phone calls at 925-931-3063. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Mark. And we'll make all this information available with follow-up email, or you can put it in the chat too, Mark, if you want, and we'll be sure everybody has it. So I just want to again say how inspired and impressed I am with all three of our speakers. I am particularly struck by how one of the things that some of us saw early in the run up to this series was a speech by Brian Stevenson, the author of Just Mercy, who talks about getting proximate to people. And as you said, Mark, not judging people by the worst thing they've ever done. And I'm just impressed that all of you, Richard, Liz, and Mark, have found ways to bridge that gap and to become more proximate. And I think that's maybe what we are all internalizing as we go through these conversations.
Mm.
So I want to, I'm conscious of time, and I want to give everybody a little bit of time to be in conversation with one another. And so I'm going to move us into breakout rooms, probably for just about 15 minutes. Our speakers are going to stay in the big room, I think, so that you won't be intimidated or informed by them in that breakout room setting, but we'll have a little chance back with them after we spend some time in the breakout rooms. I'm going to post a couple of prompts that I would encourage you to think about, but really this is just a chance for you to share with one another what you've heard, what you might have been touched by, and what you might feel inclined to do with that, given your particular strengths and passions. And so again, this is not an assignment. We're not expecting you to report back out to the big group, but it is an invitation to think a little bit about what you've heard tonight or over the series and where it might be leading you. So with that, I'm going to put you into the breakout rooms. I'll put some prompts in the chat. I'll give you a couple minutes warning, but we'll probably end up just around 8:15. So that's our next plan.
Is it okay to take a quick break and then come back?
It is.
Okay. Do you know what time?
So welcome back. Give everybody a couple minutes to find, well, a minute or so to find their way back into the big room. I hope you had a good conversation. Some rooms are getting the last few seconds out of their conversation before they return. Here they all come. Welcome back, everybody. I hope that was a good conversation. I know we've had such an amazing wealth of speakers and expertise in this series that we haven't had a lot of time for interaction, and that was maybe a little bit of a short conversation, but I hope it was an opportunity to get to know each other and to share a little bit. As I said, I'm not really going to encourage a full report out, but I wondered if there are, a few of us who either their group, really coalesced around some opportunity, or they have, they just want to share. Is there anybody who would like to speak up with that, or perhaps to pose a question to one or more of our panelists about the implications of this work for you all?
This is Sharon, and my question is, do people on death row have a different experience in jail than people who are sentenced to life? Do they have access to the various programs at San Quentin that it seems other people do?
Richard, do you know the answer to that?
They do not. San Quentin is heralded as the state prison with the greatest opportunities for various programs, educational and otherwise, for the general population. That is not accessible to people who are on death row.
Jeez.
Thank you, Richard. So I think that we can take from that then that some of these letter writing and visits are really one of the very few connections then to the broader world. Is that fair to say as well?
That's fair to say, and I will add, for just to clarify that the fellows on death row are entitled to some correspondence courses.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Are there other comments or questions? Father John?
Yeah, a quick question for Richard also. What are the limits on what you can send? You said your wife sent a package. Can you send baked goods? What can you send?
She actually, it's quite restricted as to what can be sent. Individuals cannot send books, for example. The only thing that we can really send are letters, but packages can be ordered through these services that contract with the prison for food items, tennis shoes, various things. If we want to order books for anyone, then they have to come from a publisher or through the likes of Amazon. And personally, it's an editorial comment. I choose to steer clear of Amazon.
Maureen?
Oh, no, I wasn't going to say anything.
Oh, you unmuted, so I assumed there was something coming. So other questions or comments, and I'd love to hear comments about, the conversation, if any of you were engaged in thinking about how you might integrate some of this information in your own activities or your own next steps. Well, perhaps it was a lot to take in. We have certainly heard about a wealth of opportunities to connect and to maybe think about new ways that we might engage with our neighbors broadly defined.
I think there are a couple of questions in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
One seems to be directed at Mark, and I'd give him the first shot there. Do you take medical residents?
Oh, yeah. So Mark, that is correct. Thank you, Richard, for calling that to my attention. So Mark, you talked about the tattoo removal and meeting doctors and other medical professionals. This question is about residents, people in training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, usually, yes. Yeah. We would coordinate it through their institution and our medical director. Yeah. Thank you.
And then Richard, I'm sure you saw the other question then, which was to you, which is, what do you talk about in your letters, either the first one or otherwise? How do you maintain a conversation with death row?
Well, that especially for people who express an interest, that's a very common question. Like, how do I start conversing with somebody who is condemned? And well, in my own, I will tell of my interest to develop a correspondent relationship, and I will tell people that the reason I'm doing this is because it's something that Jesus Christ encouraged me to do, and someone called it to my attention. And when I do that, I have no idea what the faith experience is of the individual. But across the board, we are not conversing with, some of the guys are not professed Christians. Some of them are just interested in a pen pal. And we don't engage in any proselytizing or we just develop a relationship. And that seems to be satisfying for all concerned.
Thanks, Richard. And then Liz, you and I were chatting briefly about some of the broader ministries that you became acquainted with when you did the survey of ministry to incarcerated people for the diocese. Do you want to just name 2 or 3 of the other programs that are available? And Liz has promised me that she will follow up with more information and sort of an inventory that she's done of some of these programs in case anybody's interested.
The short answer is there's a lot. Many of the county jails have programs where you can volunteer. Now that is on hold during COVID, but we do expect things to open up later this year. So visiting and Bible studies and worship services in the county jails. Kairos is a prison-based Christian ministry that does like weekend retreats for inmates at state prisons. And the coordinator for this area is at an Episcopal church in our diocese. There's an anti-violence project that goes into prisons run by a woman in another of our churches. There's Jails to Jobs. There's Richard's letter writing program. And just a lot of other different opportunities. So if people are interested, and especially if you're looking for something local, I'd be happy to try and help connect you with whoever's closest to you.
Thank you. And one more question, it sounds like for you again, Richard, if you were engaged in one of these letter writing campaigns, does it come to and from your home address? Is there a filter in between there? How does that work?
We recommend that there be a filter, and there are a couple of churches. We are aspiring to be an ecumenical movement. Notwithstanding the fact that it did originate at St. Paul's, but we encourage, and I think it is a comfort to beginning correspondence, to use the church as one's return address, and by that means the letter is then sent out by one of our volunteers to the correspondent from the church. And I'm going to put in the chat my contact information for anybody who's interested in anything further about death row ministry.
Thank you so much, Richard. And I'm going to be compiling some of these resources, and we'll share them with all the folks who are on our interest list for this whole series. So I will capture that information and be sure it's available along with some of these other resources and along with Mark's website and other contact information. So I think, we're about at the end of our hour and a half, and I feel like it's probably a good time to come to a close. I just really need to underline and thank again our 3 speakers tonight, Richard, Liz, and Mark. Each of you clearly had such a wealth of experience and insights and heart in your work that any one of you could have been a full-length speaker if we had had 8 weeks instead of 4 to do this series. But you are so generous in contributing your time and in the collaborative way that you worked with me and the other speakers to prepare. It was just a joy to have you and to work with you in preparing for this. And I want to thank all of you for being here again, whether you came just tonight or for the whole series. It's been really worthwhile and satisfying for, I think, all of us who participated. If you all know of other work that's going on in the community around these themes that we've been covering in this series, and you want to send those to me, I will add those to the bigger list of ideas and opportunities. And I also just want to encourage us all to think, you know, if you're like me, you like to think and you like to learn, but maybe it's time to think about what next and what to do. And so for those who are interested in pursuing that as well, I really encourage your comments back to me, to Father John, to Ann Brown. We're thinking about next steps on our Christian formation activities, and we'd love to hear ideas about that. I finally have to give a special shout out to Reverend Jim Ward, who hasn't been with us through this series, but was a huge force in helping to develop it. He's an Episcopal priest who has been a supply minister a couple times at St. Anselm's. And when we were starting to think about this idea, we reached out to him because we knew he'd had some experience in ministry at San Quentin. And just the list of people and ideas that he delivered to us made it just very easy to put together the group of speakers that we've all benefited from. So we also got some ideas from Amy Cook of the diocese. So again, there's a lot going on in this area. I had no idea until I started working on it, and I'm so impressed and inspired, as I've said before, with all the work that's going on. So I think we're going to bring it to a close, and I'm going to ask Father John, as usual, to dismiss us. And thanks again for really, especially to tonight's speakers.
Thanks, Marion. And I have some brief thank yous I want to provide before we go, and that is to the members of the Christian Formation Commission who put this together, to Ann Brown for her leadership, and particularly Marion, to you for, you know, you could be, we are blessed to have you as a facilitator. You're just remarkably skilled in what you do. And so thank you for what you've done for these last several weeks for all of us. And a special thank you as well to Mark and Liz and Richard for the work you do. And it's inspired all of us, and just what fantastic stories, and you're living into your call. So I'm going to close today with just a reference to chapter 23 of Luke, where the prisoners, or the criminals that are convicted with Jesus, are on the cross with him. And one says to Jesus, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for opening our eyes to the suffering of those who have been incarcerated. We thank you for the witness tonight of Richard and Liz and Mark, and for their example in showing us that as Jesus was able to lead the convicted criminals, those who suffered with him on the cross, into paradise, that we too can be bearers of your light, leading those out of darkness and finding, surprisingly, that we are the ones who benefit in the journey just as they do, as we travel ever closer to the light of your love. This all we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.